We're jabbering away. Okay. I love it when it says you are live, and then I don't have to like worry about, am I talking to no one? Because I'm definitely not. I'm talking to Alma and Karen Cleveland here. Thank you, folks, for joining us tonight. We are really excited to welcome back one of our favorite authors to One More Page. Alma Katsu, the author of the Taker trilogy, The Hunger and the Deep, joins us to celebrate her latest novel, Red Widow. Look at that beautiful cover. Isn't that gorgeous? Which comes out tomorrow. Alma will be joined in conversation by Karen Cleveland, who is the author of Need to Know and Keep You Close. Both of these authors are veterans of the CIA, but we are sure that any similarities to the setup of either of their books is strictly accidental. That's our story. We're sticking to it. You have any doubts or questions about that, you'll have to address that with them, but we don't want to get involved in that part of it. Red Widow is Alma's first spy novel, which is kind of surprising, given that she has spent 30 years in intelligence. But it's the marriage of her love of storytelling and her 30-year career in intelligence. It has been deemed an exhilarating, exciting spy thriller. It features two female CIA agents whose paths become intertwined around a threat to the Russia division, one that's coming from inside the agency. Fox has put into Red Widow into development, and I think it will be, is it a 1-hour series, Alma, that they're looking at doing, or a movie? Okay.
Yep.
So perhaps Alma will be able to tell us a little bit more about that at the end of our talk, because that's very exciting news. As an intelligence officer, Alma worked at several federal agencies as a senior analyst, where she advised policymakers and military commanders on issues of national security. The last third of her government career was spent in emerging technologies and technology forecasting. She was also a senior technology policy analyst for the RAND Corporation and continues as an independent consultant and technology futurist, advising clients in government and private industry. Karen Cleveland is a former CIA counterterrorism analyst and the New York Times bestselling author of Need to Know and Keep You Close, which I showed before. Karen has a new book coming out, You Can Run, which will be released in August 2021. And if you wanted to pre-order that, you can pre-order that through our website. You will see a chat box over to the side where you can submit any questions that you have for Alma or Karen. And we're most likely going to handle all of the questions at the end. So just because we're not replying right now doesn't mean we don't see them. It just means we're going to save them for the end, and we'll get to as many of them as we can as possible. I know that there's a lot of interest in this event, so I'm going to take myself out so you can hear from these two wonderful and fascinating authors. Welcome, Alma and Karen.
Thank you so much. I apologize for my dog just suddenly barking. So I had to mute if things went a little wacky there. Hopefully he's got it out of his system. So before I hand things over to Karen, I just wanted to, first of all, thank everyone who's watching. And Karen, to really thank you for joining me tonight, because I think given the, what the book's about and everything, it's really special to have another woman who worked at the agency so we can talk a little bit and kind of compare experiences.
Absolutely. I'm really happy to be here and talk with you about this fabulous book. And, let me just start by saying I was so excited when I heard about Red Widow, because, it's a modern spy thriller written about women by a woman and somebody with an intelligence background. And I feel like that's something that is, sometimes kind of few and far between, and maybe a voice that's not, that's maybe a little bit underrepresented in the genre. And when I had the chance to read Red Widow, I was even more excited because you delivered. It just, it starts off with a bang and it just doesn't let up. And I just thought it was wonderful. So I'm really excited to talk with you about it today. And I guess just to start, maybe could you tell us a little bit about Red Widow? What is the book about?
Sure. Well, I'll give kind of a setup. It starts with some Russian assets of CIA's start to disappear. They are killed or they're rolled up. And so, when something like that happens, it kind of makes you think at the agency that maybe there's a mole, somebody who knows who the assets are and is turning that over to Russia. So a young officer, Lindsay Duncan, is tapped to sort of head the hunt for the mole. And she was kind of once a rising star at the agency, but she right now her job is hanging by a thread, and we can kind of talk about how those kinds of things happen. But by being given this opportunity, it's kind of a chance for her to redeem herself. As she's doing the investigation, she makes friends with Teresa Warner, who's also a CIA officer, but her husband was killed in kind of a rogue operation that took place in Moscow. And she's still at the agency, but now, she's kind of lives under this tragic, identity as the Red Widow. So as Lindsay's tracking down the mole, she stumbles onto this web of intrigue that leads all the way back to Teresa's husband's death. And in the course of that, unearths a bunch of secrets that she wasn't meant to uncover.
And, that was one of the things that I really loved the most about the book, was just these two strong kind of female officers. And I think it's just, there was a great dynamic between them, and it was just great to read about. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about loyalty. I think that's sort of one of the themes of the book, which is, the loyalty of the people who work at the CIA to the agency, but also the agency to its people. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit more about sort of why is loyalty so important in intelligence?
It's something that I thought about, especially reflecting back on the career, in that it's just woven into the fabric of the job. And I'm really going to be curious to hear about your perspective. Those of us who've been out of the job for a little while, I think, you have some time to really reflect on what all of that means to you. But the book is about loyalty and trust and betrayal. The thing is that the intelligence agencies are very, very powerful, right? And there's a natural imbalance of power between the agencies themselves and the people who work for them. And because the business is about secrets and keeping secrets, there's always that potential for abuse because things can be hidden. So, but when you there's a good reason for it. And we all know, there's why it works the way it does. And when you take a job there, that you're not going to be privy to all its secrets. That's just a given. But you have to trust that the agency is going to work in your best interest. But sometimes you find out that's not the case, and you've been sacrificed, your life, your future. And, once that happens, your trust is shattered. And how do you go on from there? And I'm sorry to say it's not as rare as you kind of hope it would be. Yeah. But and so I thought it was kind of important to write about that, because people are fascinated about what a career in intelligence is like. And there's a lot of things that are very peculiar to the field and to the job. And those are the types of things that I hope to capture in my books. And this is a big one. Yeah.
On the subject of loyalty, do you sort of, from your personal experience in the intelligence community and in CIA, do you kind of have a feeling one way or another about sort of, just any personal experiences on the loyalty question?
Boy. So I'll just try to tread lightly here. I don't want to come off as too cynical. As I've told people, I've loved my career. I loved working at both of the agencies I worked with, and I worked with a lot of wonderful people, men and women. I have to say, I was really driven to write a book about women because I've just had so many great women friends and colleagues, and they've just been outstanding, friends and workers, right? Like some of the best managers I know have been women at CIA and NSA. And I just don't feel like we get represented enough. But unfortunately, it's not like it happens all the time, but you do, over the course of a career, sometimes wonder if you were treated fairly, that maybe your interests were given a little short shrift, sometimes for good reasons and perfectly valid reasons, but sometimes not. Sometimes just because somebody else was being favored or something like that. And it just it just makes you, so there was actually like a really horrible incident, but I can't even go into it because I'll tell you, once I mentioned it to someone who had been in the general counsel at CIA, and she looked at me and she said, if you tell me that story, I'm going to have to do something about it. And I don't want to do anything about it. So you didn't tell me that story.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Yep. Those things do happen.
Yeah.
What about you? You're not going to be as dire as I am.
I think I was fortunate in that I had sort of the same experience with management that you're talking about. That I had some really great managers, and I think I was very lucky that I pretty consistently had genuinely good management chains, and as a result of that, and just sort of everything else, I always felt like the agency was sort of very supportive of me and very loyal to me. And I think as a result, I felt very loyal to the agency. And you can certainly see how the reverse is very true. And, and not your case necessarily, but, I think there's some elements in your book and that, if you don't kind of have that support, there is a danger there. And that's a real vulnerability for intelligence services is disaffected employees. And sort of, these are people who all day, every day, they're consuming classified intelligence. And even when they're not kind of walking in and out the door, they have a head full of it. So that's a real vulnerability. And I think that you deal with that so well in your book. And I think that's really interesting. And
thank you. I mean, it is an interesting thing. The thing that we're talking about here is the insider threat. When you have folks, when all of them, like you said, Karen, have heads full of secrets, and how does the agency manage that? And so they have certain methods, and thank God, I think, the reality of the insider threat is pretty low, but it does happen. So that was one of the things. It's funny, right before this, I was doing a podcast and they were asking me, like, did you ever know Aldrich Ames? And I said, no, of course, I didn't, but I knew people who actually had worked with him, and they were, when they talk about it, they were absolutely devastated. I think, the kinds of people who end up working at intelligence agencies, they tend to be very smart. They tend to, be very serious. And a lot of us have this incredibly maybe outsized sense of justice. Like we really feel like there should be justice in the world. And so even when we're disappointed in our jobs, I think we're still, like you said, very loyal, and we know on balance, right, to put our feelings aside and go with that. And so when something like this happens and you find out a colleague actually was a traitor, it's just devastating. And that's kind of one of the things too, sometimes you're asked for writing advice. And one of the things I often say is, my favorite one is to, when you're thinking about a scene, to say, what's the worst thing that can happen? And go there. And I thought, well, what's one of the worst things that can happen to you at the agency? One is to find out that, your life literally has been sacrificed for something. And you find out later that maybe it wasn't worth the sacrifice. But the other thing is to find out that your colleague, was a traitor.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit. Your previous novels have been in different genres. So what made you decide to write a spy novel?
Well, it was partly because I thought I should be able to, right? It's been 10 years, 5 novels. Gosh darn it, I should be able to write a spy novel. And I'd always had that in the back of my mind. But as you know, once you're in a career, it's really hard to switch. Your publisher is your business partner, and they're helping you develop this following. And readers do tend to stay within a particular genre. And so it's risky to try to get an author to switch genres. But my editor, Sally Kim at Putnam, is wonderful, wonderful. And, she really encouraged me to give it a try. And so, she's also like a wonderful developmental editor too. So I said, okay, let me think about it. And I thought of, I haven't made a secret of it. This book is actually based on a real thing that happened. It's just been changed so much that you wouldn't recognize it if I told you what it was, which I won't. So nobody asked. But so I based it on that, and she just really helped me sort of ratchet the tension up until it became a book. I mean, it's very close to how I originally envisioned it, but times 10 in the excitement level. So yeah, that's my story. So what about you? I'm kind of curious. You should, how did you end up getting into writing your novels? Did you always want to be a novelist?
Well, I've always loved writing, and I think that I decided to try my hand at a spy thriller, just same reasons you're talking about. Like, it's a world that you're familiar with, and at the time that I wrote my first novel, Need to Know, it was still part of that world. I was still an agency employee. I was actually on maternity leave with one of my kids, and when I sat down to write it, I think I just tried to write the sort of spy thriller that I would want to read, and I obviously I'm not some big macho gun-toting guy. And, I'm a female. I was an analyst at the time. I had young kids, and I was juggling kind of my CIA career and everything that life was throwing at me on the home front. And I think I kind of wanted to reflect that in the book. And I think that's, there's all different kinds of people who work in the intelligence community at CIA in all different stages of life and in all different sort of, jobs within the CIA. There are so many different kind of career paths. And I think that, more of those different kind of people and career paths and jobs should be sort of reflected. And I think you would agree with that.
Absolutely. And that's what I think is so wonderful about your books too, because it shows just another side of life. Like a lot of people who worked at the agency, I wasn't always a huge fan of, spy entertainment, right? Movies, TVs, or books. I certainly love Jean Le Carré, and there's some other authors that I liked a lot. But, I had a hard time getting into the ones that, like you described, that are maybe a little bit more on the military edge. They're just, it's all about the type of gun they shoot and stuff like that. I just couldn't get into it. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other valid experiences that those of us who have been in the field have had that would appeal to certain readers if it only existed. So for me, this is going to be a little bit of a test. But I think, like you, I think there's this, this, I don't want to say niche. It sort of is, but I do think it could be mainstream that there's probably a lot of women out there who think, well, I don't really read spy thrillers, but if they like, suspense, and they've liked things like Homeland or The American, that they would like your book, they would like this book.
And I think so much of it too is sort of forming that connection with the protagonists. And I think that's so easy to do with Red Widow, because like these are two women that you just like, you want to kind of, you want to root for them, and you want to kind of see what's going on. And so I think that people can really develop a connection with those characters and yeah.
Well, thank you. I tell you, Teresa was so much fun to write, maybe because she has this anger inside and I can identify with that. But those chapters were so much fun to write. But the interesting thing is when Hollywood made the offer, the interest in the book really was that you had these two women who were kind of in opposition, at least for part of it. And yet neither of them were bad guys. Like they were both doing things for the right reasons. Yeah. And that to me is it really embodies what happens at the agency and among the women too. But even when you're in opposition, it's for the right reasons, right? Like, when you disagree on a point on what's happening with the target or something, it's rarely, I should say, petty or that sort of thing.
That's very true. And there is a lot of conflict. Like there is healthy debate about issues and targets and things like that. And, but it is, very civil, and it really kind of makes makes everything better and really improves kind of analysis and operational, contributes to successes.
That's what I wanted to show, that not only the seriousness of it, but the supportiveness of it too.
Let's talk a little bit about what it was like to work at CIA. So we see a lot about CIA in movies and TV, and just curious, what is your take on kind of how it's represented in movies and TV, and how does that compare to reality, I guess?
Well, I think it's getting better. So one thing that happened, like I just said, I really haven't watched, especially a lot of TV shows. I'll see some movies and read some books, but I didn't watch a lot of TV shows because, you know, they can be kind of outlandish. But when we sold the TV thing, the first thing they said to me is, okay, you got to go and watch every TV series that has to do with intelligence for the last, whatever, 5 years, and tell us all which ones you like and which ones you don't like, which ones get it right. And so I have to say, I think they're doing a lot better. But one of the things too, is I've come to understand as a writer of thrillers that, you know, there just has to be this difference between the reality of intelligence and, you know, what people expect for entertainment, right? They have different expectations for drama and all that sort of thing. So I was trying to sort of walk this, you know, walk the line between the two. You know, we don't run in heels and shoot guns for the most part. Maybe some talented case officer can, but not me. You know, there's a lot of little things. I don't know. How do you find it? Have you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think that what you often see is so kind of flashy and high tech. And, you know, CIA is so high tech, but it's not really in that sort of flashy sense. It's sort of more the high tech stuff is sort of happening behind the scenes. And, you know, there are a lot of very drab cubicles. And, you know, I worked in windowless vaults. Like, you know, that's not really, it probably doesn't make for as good a picture on the screen. But, you know, so there are some differences there. But yeah.
Yeah, my editor thought it was hysterical that I described how there's always like a couple paper clips, you know, in the drawer when you first take over the desk. The person has cleaned it out, except there's some paper clips and maybe a chewed up pen cap. And the other thing, oh gosh, it just went right out of my head. What was I going to say? It'll come back to me. This is what happens when you get older.
What would you say is sort of the most unexpected thing about working there? Or what's something kind of unique about the culture of Langley, I guess, specifically?
Well, it's interesting. You know, I started out in a very technical field. I was a SIGINter, so I worked for NSA for a long time. And the culture was very different at CIA. I'm not saying worse or better, just very different. But you can understand it because you know, what drives CIA? What is CIA known for? It's human intelligence, right? And human intelligence is intelligence that's derived from human sources. So for instance, signals intelligence, which is what I did before, is information that's derived from signals. So when your job is getting information from other humans, right? That's like, it's partly coercion and a little manipulation, right? It's that human connection, but sometimes it has to be managed, let's say. And that is the culture I find in CIA. And so it was different from other agencies. And I've, you know, to greater or lesser extents, your interaction, sometimes the other person is trying to manage that interaction, especially if they're a case officer, right? Yeah. So that was interesting. And that was something I tried to get through in this. It's funny, when I sold my first book, which was over 10 years ago, I was meeting with all of the Simon & Schuster execs. And I could tell they were all so excited, right, to talk to someone who was actually a spy. The book had nothing to do with that, of course. It was all magic and love and everything. But she pulls me aside and she goes, "Your book, all your characters are so twisty and manipulative. Did that have anything to do with your working intelligence?" And I looked at her and I thought, no. And then I thought, wait a minute, she's absolutely right. You know, you spend 20 years in that environment and it does kind of, you know, settle in the back of your mind, I suppose. What about you? What was the most unexpected thing?
You know, I think it was probably just kind of the sheer number of successes that the agency has that never see the light of day. And it's just, you know, especially sort of being away from it for a few years now and trying to think of something comparable in a private business. And there isn't anything, because you wouldn't really ever have a business that never puts out a press release kind of touting their own successes. Never, there's just really never any publicity about what they do well. But anytime that there's a mistake or people think there's a mistake, it's front page news. And and that's such an interesting environment. But it also becomes so normal when you're there that it's normal not to. That everything you do and every success you have is only known to a very small group of people. And I think that's part of what kind of makes the transition to writing so interesting and complicated and difficult, because you're coming out of this environment where everything's secret. And, I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, but it makes it very difficult to kind of adjust to a career where you're supposed to be telling everyone what you're doing and posting on social media when, before in your previous career, you may have been told, stay away from that. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yes, it is. And that's one reason why it's so nice to talk to you. Because as you said, like, not everybody goes through this. And when you've spent so much of your life in it, until you get out again, and then you realize, oh my God, that life that I had was actually like a little artificial in a lot of ways. And that's part of it. I sometimes look back and I think, oh, those poor people at Simon & Schuster, they must have thought I was just the biggest, dullard that there was. But it's really hard to overcome, even though you and I were both trained to do briefings, brief at a very high level. But it's a different kind of thing than selling yourself. And I think I was terrible at doing talks for my books in the beginning, because I would approach them like a briefing. And I didn't know how to entertain, because that is frowned upon. In a briefing, you're not supposed to be entertaining. But I really feel for it. But I think I had a little bit of a leg up because I was a recruiter for a year. I went around and recruited at colleges and stuff, and that does get you in the habit of being and talking about the agency in front of uncleared audiences.
Okay.
So do you find that that's difficult for you still?
It's very difficult. Yes, it's very difficult. It's something that hopefully will become a little bit easier with time. But it is just strange kind of coming from one environment to a completely different one in terms of kind of talking about your work.
Yeah, and selling yourself. It's so hard. Hard. And we have a lot of, I think we have a fair number of agency or retired agency people maybe watching us tonight. So I just want to, some of my friends, they retired roughly around the same time I did. So I can't wait to hear from them, like how, if that's how they feel now, like now that they have that distance of a couple years, do they realize how different life was when we were on the inside? And do they talk? I don't think any of them talk about themselves really, like what they did.
Let's see. What's do you miss it? Do you miss working in the intelligence community?
No, I did at first, but now, like, I don't know if you felt this way. Again, I was there so long, from when I was 23 until, I retired. So I got really used to having that safety net. I mean, one thing that folks don't understand is when you have a clearance and you're working at one of those agencies, you're accountable to them. Like if you don't check in within an hour, your manager has to check in with you. And if they can't reach you in 2 hours, they send someone to your house, right? Because you could be on a plane to Mexico. And so you just get used to, like, someone's always looking out for me. And when I first left, I was like, man, I could be hit by a car and no one would know, like it was scary. It was really scary. What about you? Do you miss it?
I would say yes and no. I think I miss sort of the impact that people have there. And, there's something kind of just so it's such an interesting job and rewarding. And to know that kind of something you're working on is making it to senior policymakers, into the president's daily brief or something like that. And that the president's reading something that you think is important, or that's being briefed to senior policymakers or something, that's just a neat feeling. And I think that that's something that the people really appreciate working there. And so I think I miss that a little bit. Sometimes the pace, which is sort of a double-edged sword, but it is nice to kind of that pace that was always sort of go, go, go. And, you can get in the morning and be working on something, and there could be an operational success by, not too far in the distant future. And that's kind of nice. I think, I'll tell you, I don't miss working in a skiff. I don't know about you, but, it is secure compartmented information facility where intelligence community folks have to do all their work because they're reading classified information and dealing with classified information all the time. I do like the freedom that comes from being able to kind of work from home and not be tied to a skiff and the DC commute and all that. So I would say kind of yes and no. But overall, it was such a great experience working there. And, I have very good memories of it.
Would you go back? Do you think you'd go back?
I would not go back. I have great memories of working there. It was a great experience, but I love writing, and I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to kind of be pursuing this career right now. And so I would not. What about you? Would you go back?
You're so diplomatic. I think about it. I actually think about it sometimes because, for the last couple of years, I was one of the first analysts to look at social media as a possible intelligence source. Yeah, that's how old I am. And that was the end of my career. But so I still do work as a social media researcher, and I advise a lot of researchers and that sort of thing. And so I know, like right now, there's a real need for people who both understand the technical points of it, of the data analysis, but also understand, the policy implications. So after the last election, I even thought, because I had been supporting some researchers who had been trying to support like the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and some other places under the previous administration. And we all know what happened there. So this was like really a chance to make some headway. But, I've worked very hard for this writing career, and, having the opportunity to do Red Widow and now with the TV series and everything, I just felt, it's time to let all that go and just try something new.
You mentioned TV, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on that front. So Fox is developing a TV series based on Red Widow, and you are signed on as an executive producer. Is that right?
I know, it's kind of weird, isn't it?
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
It's I never thought that I would have 2 careers, let alone 3 careers. And I'm not sure how much of a role I'm going to have. But, it started a couple years ago. It seemed like a lot of novelists were getting the opportunity to make the transition into TV and film. And then you started to see them getting production roles, consulting producer or something, and then executive producer roles. And I don't really know TV, but I said to my agents, I'd really like to shoot for some kind of production role. Not exactly sure what that would mean. So here I am now. I'm an executive producer, and I luckily they brought in Sarah Condon to be the executive producer putting the show together. And we had some talks, and she's a wonderful mentor, and she really understands. She was willing to take on a greenhorn like me and help me see and understand the industry. I think at first it's going to be just sort of advising the showrunner. That's the next step. We're as a matter of fact, after this, I'm interviewing a showrunner. But that once we pick a showrunner and they start working on the scripts, that I'll help advise them. And
Okay.
And again, there's that line though, right? It can't be too realistic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's
cool. So very exciting. So what about you? I know you're, that was one of the exciting things about your book. It got optioned like right away, right?
Yeah. My first book, Need to Know, the rights sold to Universal Pictures and Universal Studios with Charlize Theron attached to produce and star, which, and I'm not involved in the development the way you are, but, I'm so excited to see what they come up with and how things progress. And she's an amazing actress. So, I'd love to see her on the screen and see what she does with the characters. I think it was interesting what you were talking about kind of that line where, and I'm sure you're trying to sort of make it as realistic as possible, but not kind of run afoul of any secrecy agreements or anything. And I think that's one of the things that I have found a challenge maybe, or sort of at least like always in the back of my mind when I'm writing, and is sort of that balance. And because I think if people pick up a book that's written by somebody who's worked in the intelligence community, they want those details and they want it as authentic as possible. But at the same time, and I think we want to deliver something that's as authentic as possible. But at the same time, and I think it's drilled into us that there are adversaries out there everywhere, and they're sophisticated and they're aggressive, and they want any little crumbs the last thing you want to do is kind of give them any sort of crumbs that they could use to sort of strengthen themselves at our expense. And so, I know we have it used to be the PRB, the Publications Review Board. Now it's the Pre-Publication Classification Review Board that reviews kind of all of our work and make sure that we're not disclosing anything classified. But just curious about your thoughts about kind of how to toe that line in your experience, and especially kind of when moving to sort of the screen, and how you would juggle that.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Before I got the first book published, I actually wrote several spy thrillers, and they weren't great, so I couldn't sell them. But so I had several runs through you correctly call, but I will call the PRB because I am old and set in my ways. So what I found is over time, sort of where they draw the line shifts. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're more restrictive, mm-hmm. and other times they're not. And a lot of times that's influenced by events. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of the old timers will remember when a certain man wrote a book called Imperial Hubris that criticized the administration's approach to Afghanistan. And after that, an iron curtain fell on anything that any agency person wanted to publish for years, regardless of what was in it even. So, there's other things, unfortunately, that sometimes can influence how tight. And I hope that even by saying this, I am not bringing wrath down on my head. But for instance, I was surprised this book, the PRB didn't ask for one change. Okay. I was really amazed. So, but for me, I think what I try to do is focus more on the personal stuff. Like, how does it feel? Because that's something that every reader can identify with. You're in this situation. How does that make you feel? And maybe bringing in some of the things we talked about, the things that are peculiar to working at the agency that might make you feel more strongly a certain way or something like that. And trying to stay away from the tradecraft, sources and methods and that sort of thing. Yeah. How about you? Did you find it a challenge?
I have found it a smoother process than maybe I expected, and that maybe some other people have experienced. And I think it varies too. I think we probably both know people who've written nonfiction, and it's a little bit more of a difficult process. Since I left the agency, my interactions with the PRB have been very smooth, which I am grateful for. And I think in a sense it is like a good check. I think, and obviously Red Widow required no changes. We have a sense of like what we can and cannot say, right? And I think you develop that as you're working there, and you have to, because you have to be able to come home at the end of the day and tell your spouse something about your day, even, it's very, very little, of course, but there's you kind of know what's sort of completely off limits and what you can kind of say without violating any secrecy agreements. But I think that the PRB is sometimes a good check just to make sure that you're not accidentally disclosing. Yeah, and I have to say, I pretty much had good experiences with them. Before this book, I was lucky enough to do a graphic novel for Porsche, and they wanted it. They wanted it basically to be Atomic Blonde, but with Porsches instead of, I forget
what cars they had in that. And so, when I first told the PRB that I would be sending them these scripts, because it was a 12-part thing, I could tell they were like a little like, what are you wasting our time with? But they would turn them around like in a day. So obviously there was nothing classified in it.
Yeah.
But I think they're willing, like you said, they're willing to work with you. But yeah, I've heard of some people who have had difficult experiences.
So what's next? What are you working on now?
Well, the next book is going to be the next historical horror novel. It has to do with World War II and the Japanese internment, and this real thing that happened that I guess not too many people know about anymore, called the fire balloons. The Japanese actually sent these unmanned balloons with incendiary devices on them to the western portion of the United States, hoping to start fires and kind of spread terror. It wasn't a very successful program, but it actually did result in a few deaths on U.S. soil. So that's sort of the trigger. Like all my historical horror, they have to do more with, current day situations. So, when you look at the internment and what that really meant, turning Americans against Americans, that sort of thing, that's more what the book is actually about than the fire balloons. But then we just came to an agreement with the publisher for the next book in the Red Widow series. So I'll be starting that soon. Yeah.
Ooh, I'm excited. All right, good.
I was very excited to hear that you have a third novel coming out soon. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, so it's called You Can Run. It's coming out in August, and it's about a CIA analyst who's responsible for vetting new CIA sources or prospective sources. And as she's sort of getting to work on the CIA's hot new recruit, she gets a phone call, and the voice on the other end says, "We have your son." Her 6-month-old baby has been kidnapped, and she's sort of faced with a choice. In order to get him back, she would have to do something she never thought she'd do. So it's sort of like my other books, like Red Widow, it sort of deals with that question of loyalty to family versus country, and kind of what would you do for the people you love.
You really come up with these plots, these ideas that just get you in the heart. As a mother, did you find that was kind of hard, or does it terrify you that you can think of these things?
Yeah, so the ideas for the books have actually come from kind of thoughts that have entered my head in the past, or did when I was working at the agency. My first book, Need to Know, is about a woman who is working to uncover Russian sleeper agents and discovers that her spouse maybe isn't who she thought he was. And that idea actually came from when I was first started dating my now husband. And, he seemed like this great guy, but, you have, you're always sort of hearing that people could try to get close to you for the wrong reasons. So the thought actually entered my mind, it's like, what if he's not who he says he is? So that's sort of where the idea developed from that book. And then this latest one, I remember that the thought crossing my mind when I had my, my oldest son, when he was a baby, that, there's a lot of resources put into looking into sort of employees' finances and their foreign contacts and things like that. But really, like that's not necessarily where everyone would be the most vulnerable. And sometimes sort of family is where you're the most vulnerable. So it is sort of, and I think you were talking before about kind of worst case scenarios. And I think that was sort of the idea for that.
You are brilliant at that. I mean, you are not afraid to go there. And that is, what they tell writers. A lot of times we censor ourselves, and, it could keep you from a great story idea like that. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. Was your husband at all like a little,
He's not a Russian spy. And I think there were quite a few people who thought perhaps maybe he is, but no, he's definitely not. So, and I don't know if you've had this experience with any of your books, but I was sort of surprised that I felt like there's a tendency for people to think that you're writing about yourself in your books and your own relationships and things like that. And I was surprised the degree to which people sort of thought the character in my first book, especially, was me, and she's not. None of the people are, and I don't know if you've had that experience and if you have any advice for that, or
No advice, but I got to tell you, and it's really weird because my first 3 books were these sort of, I don't want to say paranormal fantasy, but they went in that direction, right? So it had this fantastical supernatural element and these supernatural characters in it, but it was very dark and very strange in a very particular way. And so when that first book came out, like all these people came out of like the closet to me who were into this very strange thing, thinking that I was like their leader. And that was very strange, including the people at the agency would
really
ask to me. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was very funny. But anyway, yeah. So I'm happy to see those days are behind me now.
I think this is a good time to switch to some other questions before Alma has to reveal too many things about herself, because I remember some of the people who came to see her at those events for those books, and there were some who traveled quite a distance to see her. So you both have had 2, maybe 3 careers now, with the CIA and now as authors. And one of the questions is, if you had not been with the CIA or been writing books, what other career might you have chosen?
You want to go first, Karen?
That's a good question. Growing up, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. So it's completely unrelated to both of these careers, but that was sort of what I wanted to do for a long time. And then, I think eventually it just, actually for me, kind of 9/11 sort of changed things for me. And that's what sort of put me into the kind of wanting to pursue a career in intelligence. And so that's where I ended up. How about you, Alma?
That's very good. I always wanted to be a writer, and I thought I'd be a novelist, but at the time, it was not very transparent. How does one become a novelist? And so I did the job that you can see, which is, making a living writing, which was a reporter. So I was a reporter for a while, and then I ended up being in public relations for a while. And the opportunity to work in intelligence came out of the blue. It was not anything that I had planned for. So if I hadn't gone that route, I probably would have gone back into newspaper work.
Oh, okay. Apart from yourselves, obviously, who would you say are the greatest living espionage writers that might have been overlooked?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
You're probably gonna have a better answer than me, so I'll go first. Because I don't have a great answer for this, but I like looking for anyone who has worked at the agency before, and there are some folks who have written novels. Mark Henshaw comes to mind. He's wrote a series, a Red Cell series, and Susan Hassler wrote a book called Intelligence. And I think that it's kind of cool to always see the little details that other people who have kind of worked in the community are able to kind of throw into their books and their perspective just from working there.
There's a great series. It's set in North Korea, and it's the Inspector O series. And I forget the author's name. It's a pseudonym. I want to say Church maybe was the last name that he used. But the author is actually a former North Korean analyst at the agency. And I don't know if he started writing the books when he was still an analyst, but he ended up being a contractor back for the agency on North Korean topics. And he was writing the books. And he ended up working for a friend of mine. And the friend had brought me into their office, and he was walking me around, and we were talking. And I guess the guy must have overheard us. But he was so true to character. I mean, on one hand, being an analyst, but also North Korea, kind of keeping your head down kind of thing. He wouldn't write to me directly, but he asked my friend to pass an email to me. Just sort of like, oh, oh, nice, you're another author or something. But then he would never let me like contact him directly or anything. But his books, I should say, look up his books because they were actually just fascinating. He knew so much about North Korea.
Yeah, it looks like his name is James Church.
Yeah, pseudonym.
Yeah, he's got a whole series, a whole Inspector O novel series. So that does sound great.
They're very good, really good.
Now, besides each other's books, what are you both reading right now, or is there anything you would recommend to people to read? But I think everyone always wants to know what are authors reading.
I just finished a book. It's not out until the fall, but it's called Damascus Station, and it's by another CIA officer, David McCloskey, and it's his first novel, and I thought it was great. And again, I think it's so cool to see what folks who have worked there have to say about the agency.
Well, it's probably really interesting to you because you notice things that the rest of us would not notice necessarily as being something that's specifically related to the agency. We just might think it's background information, and meanwhile, that if you pull the Twizzlers bar thing in the vending machine, something else will happen.
I just told a podcast about the secret hot dog machine in the basement of, I think it was old headquarters building, which I understand is not there anymore. So yeah, there are all of those kinds of things too. Well, to get ready for this series, the launch series, I'm, brushing up on a couple of the other folks' books. I just finished Michael Carita's most recent book, Never Far Away, and that was excellent, very excellent. And it has a female protagonist. So if people like thrillers, they probably would like to read that. And then also I'm finishing up Joseph Finder's last book, which is House on Fire. And that man, I just want to slap him. He's so smart, such a smart man. Every page you can kind of see, wow, he's so thinky. How did he get to this? Oh, and the next page is even thinkier. So yeah, and he's also like a really, if you want to understand thrillers, like he's a good guy to read. He just writes such good ones.
So do you both find yourself reading more fiction than nonfiction?
Yeah, I think so. I would say yes.
Yeah, it depends on the book. So when I'm doing the historical horrors, I have to do so much research that I read a lot of nonfiction. Yeah. But now in the downtimes, I'm sure, Karen, you get the same thing, like a lot of requests for blurbs and stuff. So you're, powering through these novels at night.
Alma, we have a congratulations to you from Matthew Jones. So,
hi, Matt.
About the release of your novel and the TV series, and he was wondering, since you have explored, writing serial scripts as an executive producer, do you see that you might be writing a script for any of the episodes of the show?
So this is funny. I don't know, Karen, maybe your experiences have been different or you've heard other people. I'm finding that they tend in Hollywood not to particularly want novelists to try to write scripts. I mean, they are such different story forms. And when you've got a show under contract and you're trying to get it into production, you got to move really fast. So they've kind of resisted I've said, I'd really like to try hand in a script, but we're about to start pitching one of my other books. And the team that's behind the pitching, trying to sell it, understand that I really want to try to write a script. So I think they're going to give me a shot on that one. I can't even hire myself as a writer. Isn't it terrible?
We had an author who came and spoke at the store, and he had been wrote scripts for the for TV shows, and then he went to become an author, and you could really tell from reading his book because his style was so very different, very fast paced, not a lot of description that you find in other things. And it certainly, as a book, it really moved along and it was good, but you could definitely tell it was a very different style of writing. This is a question for both of us, and maybe we'll make this our last question because I know we have kind of a hard stop time. But One of the questions is, if someone was curious to learn more about the inner workings of the CIA, what nonfiction books do you find to be the best resources? I understand, that probably a lot of the stuff that might really get into the details probably gets screened out before it sees the light of day. But are there any nonfiction books that you would suggest to people?
You want to go first, Karen?
Sure. So I'm not sure about specifically kind of the inner workings of the CIA, but sort of from a terrorism perspective, I worked counterterrorism for most of my time at the CIA, and I like a book called The Triple Agent, which I think is really good. And
that Joby Warwick?
Yeah. Yeah. And The Looming Tower. And yeah, I don't know. Over to you, Alma.
Well, I have probably maybe a little bit more of the official answer. So in recruiting, CIA draws up a recommended reading list for people who are aspiring to get a job, so that they give them more of a background, more in-depth background. So I would recommend that first. Go to the recommended reading list. But there's actually a lot of resources that CIA itself puts online. So if you go to the website, cia.gov, and look at resources, and part of that will point you back to an office that I supported for a long time, which is the Center for the Study of Intelligence. And they do all the historical looks. They release a lot of unclassified reports that look at specific events in history and also do more strategic overlooks. There's just a ton of great resources that they make available.
Wow, thank you. I wouldn't have thought they would have something like that, but I guess it makes sense that if they want people to come and work there, that they want to give them an idea of what it's about. And Karen, thanks for the shout out about The Triple Agent. I just loved that book by Joby Warwick, and it I'm not a big nonfiction reader, but that just captured me.
It reads like a novel. Yeah.
It is. It's fantastic. So he just came out with a new book as well. I can't remember what the title was, but The Triple Agent is always on our shelves.
Okay. Nice.
So anyway, you two have been fantastic, and I know we could ask you so many more questions, but I know we have a hard stop. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been so fun and fascinating, and hopefully neither one of you gets in trouble for anything that you might have said tonight that you weren't supposed to say.
It could be catastrophic. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. This has just been so much fun to talk to someone who's, been through the same things. And
so Alma, maybe when Karen's book comes out, you can, you guys can come back, the two of you.
Sounds good.
It does sound very good. Yeah. And at least if not, I'll be in the audience listening.
Okay. Well, everyone have a wonderful evening, and thanks so much.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
It only ends